I wanted to take a little time to talk about how we would like to approach goals in the future. We've historically kind of used this system where we provide kind of an extensive, or sometimes not so extensive, feedback mechanism at the end of the year related to goals that are created throughout the year. In reading a book called Measure What Matters with the associate directors in the center, I think that we need to shift to the OKR approach or something more in alignment with that. So objectives and key results. I'm hoping that we as a group can begin to discuss this and perhaps read the book together or important portions of it. But one of the main things about objectives and key results is that they break off from this more traditional approach that we're using, in that we need to provide feedback to each other more systematically, more comprehensively, and more regularly. So instead of doing this big thing at the end of the year, I'd like us to all provide regular updates to each other about how things are going, with both your associate directors, but also me, and then vice versa too. And so instead of kind of writing out everything at the end of the year and saying like, I completed this, I didn't complete that. Instead, we'll know what's completed throughout the year. We'll keep a list of those activities. Those are the key results and things. And then people will get more immediate feedback, and they'll know how they're doing throughout the year because they'll be getting that feedback. And it doesn't have to be long and extensive or things like that. It can be very clear, crisp. But again, that regularity is important. So the second thing related to objectives and key results is that not all of the objectives should be attained, or key results should be attained by the end of the year. So, you know, the process that we're using right now is based on a year. Well, why a year? Like, it seems that that's a pretty arbitrary measure. It connects nicely with the seasons and, you know, the rotation of planets and things like that. But some objectives and key results take longer than a year. So as you approach your objectives and key results, if it's going to take longer than a year, that's fine. But we need to have the markers laid out along the way. Some objectives only take a month or two. So for example, you know, revisions of classes that pop up out of nowhere, the development of the Student Support Center. Those are things that take less time. And so your key result there, the creation of the Student Success Center, for example, will be done before the end of the year. And it's something that should be celebrated in the moment, but also contribute to the overall performance, if you want to use that term, throughout the year. Now, there could be another key result. For example, maybe another key result related to the Student Support Center is that we want 5,000 users by the end of 2020. So we want 5,000 users and then we might have to define, what does it mean to be a user? Is it just to go into the Student Support Center? Because we'll probably get way more than 5,000 in that way. No, maybe we say a user is someone who completes a modular activity, or someone who watches a video to completion. And maybe we break out those key results, right? So we want 5,000 individual videos, or students who've watched videos to completion. We want 5,000 students to have completed modules. And then this relates to the next thing, which is trying to think of numbers that can connect to your objectives. So as we think about future objectives and things, I'm seeing a lot of people, you know, in their review say, I taught my 8 classes, I taught my 10 classes. and that's good, and that's a requirement of your position. But I'd like to try to move away from just listing things that are requirements of our position, and instead think of numbers that can connect to your objectives. So let's say that you want to incorporate more video feedback in your classes. Well, one simple key result there could be, I intend on providing 5 video responses, either in the discussions or in weekly feedback, to students in every one of my classes. Okay, and then it's very easy for people to determine whether or not you achieved your objective there. So all you have to do is look, did you have 5 videos? Or maybe you say, I want to create assignment related videos where I explain to students how to approach assignments and how to successfully complete them. And I plan on doing that for every single written assignment in my class. And so maybe you say there's like 4 of those. Pretty easy to see whether or not you achieve that goal. Or perhaps you say, this year I'm going to really focus on discussion feedback. My plan is to respond to at least 20 students in discussions every week. Again, so anyway, think about the ways that you can push your teaching. Think about the ways that you can push your coaching or the elements of the class or of your job requirements, and then connect those to metrics. And then it's easy for everybody to see, which leads to the next thing. I want to see more read. So in this book, they use basically numbers to determine whether or not an objective is green, yellow, or red. And the person, John Doerr, I think is his name, he who wrote the book and uses this perspective when he goes into different institutions or organizations. He says, I want to see more red. So one thing that I would like to try to cultivate in the center is a perspective that that says, I'm going to aim for something really high and I might not get it. So according to Doerr, if you have green, 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 that is a problem. That is not a good thing. So I want us to create goals. Now, you shouldn't create a bunch of goals that are totally impossible, right? And I'm not asking people to do that. But if you're creating goals that are green, green, green every year. So for example, one that's green every year is, I taught my 10 classes, I taught my 8 courses. Yeah, well, of course, like if you didn't do that, then we would be having a conversation about why you didn't do that. But so in a lot of these places, they say, create goals where some are going to be yellow, perhaps even some are red. And then, which leads to the next point of all of this is that like the goals are important and we provide scores to those things, but in the future, objectives and key results will be separated as much as possible from compensation. So it might actually be better for someone to shoot for a goal that ends up being red, but they've completed a certain amount of work on, or maybe it ends up yellow, than someone who has all green goals. And in the book, they talk about the objectives, the who cares objectives. So a who cares objective is one that if you complete it will have no impact on your institution or organization, and no one will care if you complete it. Now, I'm not saying that people have who cares objectives. I'm just using that as an example. So if you're thinking about what you want to do for 2020, and we'll go through this in a lot more detail, and I'm not including all the subtlety of what the claims that they're making. But if you're putting things down as goals that will not, like, for example, positively impact student retention, or that no one really will care about that you did it, then it just shouldn't be on there. And then we should be thinking of other things that will relate to the higher level goals of things like impacting student cohort retention, or positively impacting associate faculty behavior. Now you might say, like, well, how can we connect that, Justin? That's an excellent question, but that's part of it, right? We can figure that out together. Maybe we need to start providing more surveys after we do professional development opportunities for associate faculty to get their perspective on whether or not it was meaningful, to see if they've actually incorporated any of the feedback. We need to become more experimental, which is the last item. Let's become more bold, more creative, and more experimental. I know that the environment can often lead to a stifling of creativity where people feel afraid. And when we're afraid, obviously the parts of our brains that are more creative and innovative are totally shut down because we are in a modified form of the fight or flight response. But let's be bold, let's be creative, let's be experimental. And so if we do try to implement something and it doesn't work or it has negative outcomes, that's okay. That is absolutely okay. And what we'll do then is we'll take that thing and revise it and try it again. That's how we have to be. That's what I want to foster in the center. So So another great example, we are revising course 1. EXP 105 right now is experiencing some of the lowest bar rates ever, and positive student success metrics. So when we implement the new course 1, we might see that the bar denial rate goes up. We might see that the student fail rate goes up. Well, if we are afraid, then what will happen is we'll all like tuck our tails, keep our heads down, and be like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to us? But no. If we implement and there are negative outcomes, there are multiple options. We could do an immediate revision of course 1 and see what happens. We could revert back to EXP 105 while we do a more extensive revision of course 1. Those are just 2 off the top of my head. I'm sure you all can come up with others. Let's take that perspective. Let's be academics. Let's be scientists. Let's try things, evaluate them, and if they're negative, then we revise them. And even if they're positive, in certain instances, we might choose to revise them to try to create better outcomes. And so all of this, I think, leads up to objectives and key results. I'm making this video as just an initial commentary on the way that I hope that we can do things. Again, I'd like to follow up by systematically all reading this together. But as we create goals for 2020, we will be using this perspective. And so if, and it should be the same for us. So if you look at me or your associate directors and you think, Justin, who really cares about that? Like, who cares? You can let us know. And you ought to. That's another thing about this objectives and key results is like the environment that needs to surround it so that it can be successful. And one of that is like radical authenticity and truthfulness. And I know it's hard, and I know that people might say like, well, I just need to do it because Justin said or whatever, or because he thinks it's important. But if you really think it's a who cares thing, we can have that conversation and we can figure out how to make it into something where people care. And we'll do our best to try to guide things in that way too. But I'd really like, as you all begin to think about your goals for 2020, I'd like you to try to take some of these principles into mind. Think about the things that you really want to try, really want to do, that can really impact student success, that can really impact to create a positive environment and culture here at Ashford between your colleagues, and all of those things. Like, let's go for it. Let's do our best.